Hello, everyone. This week we're going to be covering Chapter 4. It's called External and Internal Organizational Environments and Corporate Culture. And in this chapter, we're basically going to break down what environments organizations operate in, how structures and cultures help them succeed, and why adapting to change is critical in today's business world. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then we'll get started. All right, so again, chapter 4, external and internal environments and corporate culture. So our learning objectives for this chapter, we're going to focus on five main things. First, we're going to learn how to define the external environment itself, then identify external pressures, compare different organizational structures, explain the role of culture in organizations, and then recognize key trends that shape today's organizations. So, why do environments matter? Organizations, you have to think of them like a living thing. They don't, exist in this bubble that isn't impacted by anything. They're constantly influenced by forces from the outside and from the inside as well. So a company that adapts survives, and one that doesn't basically fails. And one good example is Blockbuster. I don't know if any of you are um, old enough to remember Blockbuster. But it was a movie rental. They would allow you to rent like VHS, DVDs, and they didn't adapt to this changing trend in with technology that shifted from physical VHS or DVDs to digital streaming. And they didn't adapt like Netflix, for example, because Netflix also used to rent the DVDs, but they would mail them to you. Netflix adapted, transitioned to 100% digital, screening of movies, and basically Blockbuster failed, and you've seen how Netflix is doing today. So the fit between a company and its environment is everything, and it really depends on, like I said, that adaptability on whether a company survives or not. So if the environment plays such a big role in shaping the organization, the next step is to break it down and see what exactly is outside the company walls. And that's where the external environment comes in. It includes all the outside forces that can either help a business succeed or create new challenges for that adaptability that we're talking about. So the external environment, there are some key external forces that there are these outside factors that affect the company. So you have economic, that could be like a change with inflation or unemployment that might impact sales, for example. And there's technology like maybe social media or AI. You see a lot of companies now that are being forced to adapt to AI and figuring out ways to work with it and use it to improve in some way, or do, whatever task they perform, whatever business or service they offer, incorporate AI somehow to adapt. So technology, and then there's social forces like maybe Gen Z's values maybe affect how they hire people now. You see a lot of changes in demands of different generations of what they're looking for in jobs and things like that. So that impacts hiring and marketing and things like that. If people care about certain societal issues, the companies need to be aware, organizations need to be aware in order to, continue communicating to these new customers that are shifting their values and things that they want out of their businesses or companies. And then there's government, politics, government. So themselves, or maybe global events, for example, trade wars, tariffs, things like that. Those can disrupt businesses, and we're seeing that a lot. As if there's a change, maybe we impose a new tariff on a country that might impact how much it costs us, and maybe the consumer's no longer willing to purchase that discretionary item, or maybe the company's choosing to no longer carry this particular item because now there's a tariff associated with it that they can't necessarily afford. So those also impact organizations and disrupt businesses. Not only, like I said, the prices of things and decisions to carry, but just the business overall. And then there's even like natural disasters. Maybe there's like a hurricane, and then there's like global forces like climate change and things like that. So there's so many things that can impact an organization. And as a manager, it's important to understand what all these things could be and how and think of strategies of how you would approach certain things that might come up. And also to stay at the forefront. I see a lot of managers that will go to conferences to learn about, for example, AI and strategies for using AI in their workforce. And I see it sometimes when I take my daughter to the doctor will ask me, is it okay if I use AI to take notes for this meeting? And they literally record our entire conversation of what we discuss, and that is literally transcribed by AI. And that's something that they're doing to stay on top of it. So managers sometimes will go to these conferences to learn ways of keeping their organizations ahead of these different things that might be impacting their business or bottom line. So some examples, thinking about, for example, ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft, they disrupted taxis. So they used technology and this need that was still kind of there in terms of people wanting cheaper options or wanting to share the cost. So Uber and Lyft really came in and competed and disrupted taxis. And then you see like TikTok, for example, has changed the way that companies market to different generations. Now people want these short, catchy, viral commercials. They don't want the old school, like, and people a lot of times don't necessarily watch TV anymore. So as a company, if you want to continue marketing, you have to adapt to these new trends. And then you see also Zoom, a lot of Zoom meetings, I mean, I'm doing a lecture on Zoom now. It's changed the way that education is delivered. It's changed the way that people have meetings. And the pandemic created this challenge, and it forced companies to think of ways of, getting around. If we can't meet in person, we're going to meet using, some kind of portal software, whatever it was. Obviously, we have like FaceTime and things like that. But professionally, this organization called Zoom came in and said, hey, we offer these platforms where you can continue having your meetings digitally. And that's something that had to happen overnight. These companies had to adapt overnight, and that caused Zoom to become like the one of the top video conferencing platforms. So examples of how this adaptation is required in times of need. And now, we have now a contract, for example, at Yuba College with Zoom, so we all have access to Zoom as your instructors, but students have access to Zoom, administrators have access to Zoom, and it's now become our platform that we use. I know we also have like Microsoft Teams and things like that, but all of these are required for us to continue staying relevant in today's, education world and our professional world, and organizations have to do the same. So we talked about the external environment. So now let's transition now to the internal environment. This is inside a company. And this also matters. You have the employees, the leaders, all of these individuals that work inside the organization. And the way that a company is structured shapes how all these people interact and perform. So, for example, if leadership creates a toxic culture, maybe the employees are like, I'm out of here. They want to leave. So, even if a company is doing well financially, if they have a toxic leader or toxic culture, employees will not want to stay. And then on the other hand, you have really supportive workplaces that make people, it attracts people and it makes people want to work there and stay there for a very, very long time. So you have the employees, the organizational structure that really creates that culture, the leadership, obviously, that drives the culture, and then any resources available to the firm. So now, we have a sort of a sense of what the factors are from the outside and from the inside. So now that we looked in things like culture, resources, and internal relationship, let's talk about how these elements actually get organized. So companies can structure themselves in a lot of different ways. Some follow very like rigid rule-based models, and others are more flexible and adaptive. And so these are what we call mechanistic versus organic structures. So there's these two different types of structures. Um, so mechanistic is like military, strict hierarchy, lots of rules, not a lot of flexibility. And then organic is, I mean, think about organic, right? It's more like a startup, flexible, team-oriented, able to adapt. Each has its pros and cons depending on the environment. But understanding whether an organization is more mechanistic or organic gives us a big picture view, but we can also get more specific. So there's different types of structures that companies use to organize. So these are different structural models. There's functional, divisional, matrix, geographic, team-based, and virtual. And they use these to organize their work, how they actually respond to these environments. And these are very different at different types of organizations or businesses. And so we'll go through each of these. Functional organizations organized by job type. And so you have like HR or marketing, like as an example, think of a traditional bank. So they might have different departments like for loans or customer service and marketing. So each one is focused only on their specialty. Then we have divisional. This one organizes by product or customer. So think about Disney. It has Disney parks, Disney Plus streaming, there's merchandise divisions, and each one operates like its own business because they have very different, goals, customers, very run very differently. Then you have Matrix. Matrix blends both functional and divisional. So a good example is NASA, where an engineer might report to a functional boss for engineering standards, but then they also might report to a project manager because they're working on a specific mission. It's flexible, but it can be confusing because sometimes people have two bosses. So again, it's like a mix of functional and divisional. Then you have geographic. This one literally divides by region. So think of like McDonald's. They have menus in the US, right? And we have burgers and fries. And then there's a McDonald's in India and lots of different countries. But they'll have like, for example, in India, they'll have veggie heavy items to fit the cultural preferences of that particular geographic area. So they're split by region. And then there's team or networked. These structures emphasize collaboration. An example is like Spotify. Spotify uses this model, creating squads, and then the squads all work together like mini startups within the larger company. And then there's virtual. Virtual structures rely on remote workers. So a company like GitLab is fully remote with employees across the world collaborating online. During COVID, a lot of organizations had to work virtually. So we all, including myself, we had to become number six. But it was temporary just because of COVID. So many organizations had to temporarily adopt that structure, but eventually went back to their original one. So here's some well-known examples, just a little more context to hopefully get you to understand each of these. So Starbucks often uses geographic structure. So you'll see Starbucks stores in like Japan, and they might have like matcha lattes and smaller cup sizes to fit the local preferences. I've experienced it myself. I went to recently a Starbucks in France, and they use more of the espresso, trend that is more popular over there. So they adapt to whatever location they're in, to fit those local preferences. But then, you go to Seattle and you'll see the pumpkin spice lattes and the large sizes of coffee that we like here in the US. So each region adapts to the cultural tastes, pricing, and the customer habits. And then even though you're adapting, you still keep that brand consistent. Google is another example, and this particular organization does matrix and team structures. So you have, again, engineers that might report to their functional manager in software engineering, but then they might also report to a cross-functional team. Maybe they're building a new product or something different. So they all have those two bosses, and that, like I said, can be a little bit confusing. Google encourages collaboration across departments, so people from design, marketing, and engineering all contribute together. So they believe that this flexibility allows them to be innovative and to come up with things faster. And so that's why they choose that model. And then we have Amazon. Amazon uses a combination of functional and divisional structures. It has functional departments like HR, finance, legal, but it also has separate business divisions like Amazon Prime, Amazon Web Services, Whole Foods, and retail. So each division runs with some independence, but they share resources and systems from the larger Amazon, organization. So this mix allows Amazon to stay efficient while managing very different types of businesses under one roof. So here's another way to make organizational structures simple for you. Functional is like school departments, so think math, English, science. And then divisional is like a store with separate sections. Each one has its own manager. Matrix just means you may have two bosses, like a coach and a teacher, both guiding you. And then geographic means the same company adapts to different regions. And then team structures are like project groups. And then virtual just means the team works online from different places, could be different places in the country, in the city, in the world. And so these examples should hopefully help you create like a clearer picture of how to differentiate these. So now let's move on to corporate culture. Corporate culture is basically the personality. Think of the personality of the organization, the company, the nonprofit, the business. It's the personality, the shared values, the beliefs, the behaviors that guide how people work and interact and make decisions in that company. So think of it like the unwritten rules of how things get done. The textbook describes four main types of culture using something called the competing values framework. There's clan, adhocracy, market, and hierarchy. So clan, think of like a family. It emphasizes teamwork, collaboration, employee involvement. Companies with this culture care a lot about their people and often provide lots of support, lots of mentorship, and lots of opportunities for growth within the organization. Adhocracy culture values innovation and risk taking. These organizations are always trying new ideas and pushing the limits. They're flexible and often in fast changing industries like technology. And then you have market cultures focused on competition and getting results. So these companies set aggressive goals and they're always expecting their employees to perform at high levels. So success is always measured by like market share, growth, profit, money. And then you have hierarchy culture, and this emphasizes structure, rules, stability. And these organizations want consistency, efficiency, and control. So you'll find this culture in places like government agencies, a hospital, large corporations that have been around for a long time. And culture matters because it really influences everything. It influences whether if I'm an employee, it influences whether I feel motivated. It influences how customers experience the company, how well the organization adapts to change, all of that. And a company's culture can be its biggest strength, or it can really hold it back if it doesn't fit the environment. And so it's a really important thing. I see it a lot now more than ever. Companies really want to convey, who they are to new employees. And you always see, especially the younger folks now, they really think about joining organizations or businesses when they're looking for jobs. They really want to know, is this company a good fit, a good culture fit for what I want, what I'm looking for in an employer? And companies also look at employees with that mindset. Does this person fit in our culture? Like if they're a family, for example, if they have that clan culture, does this person fit within our clan culture? And that's something that both employers and employees really weigh now, I think, more than ever. So that culture can really be the reason you get, a superstar employee that stays at your organization forever, or if you get someone that's leaving next month, and if with HR and training and all that, it's so expensive to frequently turn over employees. So the longer an employee stays with you and the more motivated they are, and you don't have to reinvest in recruiting, rehiring, retraining another person. So it's a really great thing to have people want to stay with you long term, and that's really driven by that corporate culture. All right, so now that we've defined the main types of corporate cultures, let's look at some real world examples so you can see how these cultures actually show up in well-known organizations or companies that we might know. So Google encourages collaboration with team projects and perks, very, very clan-like. And then you have Amazon, which is obsessed with efficiency and delivery and results. So they have that market culture. And then you have an entity like the DMV, very focused on that hierarchy. And then you have Tesla that's always innovating, even if it breaks rules. So they're always pushing for that innovation in adhocracy. So you see a little bit of everything in, good, very well-known organizations that we see today. So now let's talk about some of the trends shaping the future. And these are big challenges that organizations face today, and they have to continue to figure out ways of adapting, especially as people put more focus on some of these, that they might care more about organizations prioritizing these particular issues. So we have inequality and fairness issues in the workplace. We have global political uncertainty. There's climate change, rising cybersecurity threats, and companies aren't judged just by profits anymore. They're also now judged by how they impact society. So think about how much people care about whether a brand is sustainable or ethical. That's something that people really care about. And you see that with companies like Shane. Does this company use child labor to produce their products? Does this company pollute the world? Things like that. We see a big shift in people caring about those things now. And if companies don't adapt to those changes, people will boycott them and not want to buy their products anymore. So it's something that companies really have to struggle with navigating these different priority issues. So key takeaways for this chapter: every organization has to fit with both its external and internal environments. Structures give them a way to respond to those different forces, and culture shapes how people act inside the organization. So trends from technology to climate change require adaptability, and companies have to adapt or they become obsolete. And as future managers, your job will be to understand these different forces and help your organizations adapt, to overcome, and continue to thrive from that organizational perspective.